Nothing like a good old retrospective to lift my spirits. Yeah, for those who weren't aware, my next retrospective was meant to be a completely different game, but there were a lot of setbacks in making that video, so in the meantime, I'll cover a different game instead. Anyways, enough about that. Let's talk about a third-person shooter action mech game. Oh yeah. People seem to remember mech games as being slower paced games with an emphasis on simulation and tactics. Mech Warrior usually comes to mind, maybe Steel Battalion. But around the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a pretty big explosion of awesome 3D mech games that played like traditional action games first and foremost. Shogo, Slave Zero, Mech Assault. But this is Gunmetal. This was originally an Xbox exclusive. Yeah. It was a third-person mech game developed by Rage Games in 2002. And before you compare it to Mech Assault, just know that it actually came out a few months earlier. I also say Xbox exclusive, but I'd put that in air quotes, since this game was ported to PC about a year later. The PC port actually had a handful of significant differences, mainly in the controls, which I'll get into later. I will say, while I think the PC cover art looks slightly cooler than the Xbox cover art, I can't deny the original Xbox art has some charm to it. Like something about it. The dated 3D render, the glowing green cockpit, it just oozes early 2000s Xbox. Although I think we can all agree that the Polish cover is easily the best. I mean, look at it. Anyways, we're getting quite a few intro cinematics, and yeah, they completely give away the game's gimmick. In Gunmetal, you pilot a mech that can also transform into a fighter jet. I was kinda hoping to hide that feature until I was in-game just to push the wow factor, but it looks like the devs were more excited to show it off than I was. They even included in the opening logos. Anyways, this intro just shows a generic action scene, giving us a brief taste of what the game has to offer. Alright, let's get to the main menu. You know, I'm not exactly sure when we as a gaming industry decided to move away from flashy 3D animated menu screens, but damn do I miss it. I played this game a handful of times, and every time I load into the main menu, I do get a little hyped. Oh yeah, give me a mech to pilot, let's do this. Although the menu itself is pretty bare bones. Yeah, this is a single player only game. Also, another thing is that I already have a completed save game. And while you are able to replay missions, you have access to a bunch of unlocked weapons that you weren't supposed to have when you first played them. It's a neat inclusion, but it makes some of the early stages super easy. So let's just make a new game. There we go. There's actually no intro or anything. Our first mission is to defend our intel headquarters, where the enemy has broken through our front lines, and now we're going to use it as an opportunity to unveil our secret weapon, which may or may not be a giant transforming robot. Of course, this is kind of confusing to anybody just starting the game for the first time. I know it was for me. The enemy? The war? What's going on here? Luckily, like every good old game, it came with a manual. So to summarize it quickly, Gunmetal is set on the planet Helios, an Earth-like habitable planet that was colonized some time ago through the use of a massive constructed jump gate. It's unknown how long we've actually been here, since the manual only refers to the early settlers as our ancestors. And it also mentions how the gate itself is an ancient piece of technology that lays in orbit completely untouched, to the point where it's now basically a memorial rather than an actual piece of equipment. Apparently, the ancestors of the current people living on Helios fled here after a Cold War went hot back on Earth, and multiple factions fought to take over. A final last stand took place at the jump gate on Earth as people fled to Helios, only for that side of the gate to be destroyed. Helios was now completely cut off from Earth, presumably for generations, but it would remain relatively peaceful, with law and order upheld by a standing security force and a planetary government. But recently, out of nowhere, the jump gate was reactivated as an enemy faction rushed through to recolonize and take over Helios. I'm just inferring that this is one of the factions that took over Earth generations ago during the war. As to why they're immediately trying to attack us, I don't know, maybe it's just an old grudge. Luckily, the jump gate was so old that it basically collapsed in on itself. While the enemy force remains cut off, they've still managed to take a foothold and are currently waging a pretty successful war against the people on Helios, forcing them to come up with a secret weapon, a giant mech. Anyways, same as before, enemies are closing in, time to reveal the mech, yada yada, that's the plot. So this is the game. Well, there's our mech, dual SMGs. Nice. There's something cathartic about seeing a giant robot hold a giant submachine gun. Anyways, here's the gameplay. Pretty basic stuff. I can shoot my main weapons. If I right click, I have lock on homing rockets that sort of target who my cursor is pointed at. My machine guns have unlimited ammo, but the same can't be said for my alternate weapons. I can swap to a flat cannon, which is a little more weak than I'd want a giant flat cannon to be. Also, it looks remarkably similar to another more noteworthy flat cannon. I can't put my finger on it. So yeah, this is the on foot gameplay. You move pretty slow, it's hard to dodge projectiles unless you're at a distance, but overall, I mean, it feels pretty good. Guns feel good, the controls feel solid, but this is only half of the gameplay. If I'm going to want to cross these large levels, I'm going to need a faster mode of transport. Whoa, that's more like it. Yep, there's the gimmick of the entire game right there. You can swap between robot mode and jet mode at the press of a button. As a fighter jet, you're much faster. You can fly, do barrel rolls, zip across the map. Honestly, this is pretty great stuff. Even if the transformation is a little slow and awkward looking, it never gets old being able to jump into the air, transform, and fucking boost out of there. Anyways, I'm actually shocked to say that the jet controls are pretty good. Mainly because it goes for arcadey physics as opposed to an actual flight sim. You have good handling, it's easy to move and turn, although I have found that if you try and turn a little too quickly, or if you flick your mouse too hard, you can end up completely disoriented. It's hard to explain, but I've done this multiple times in the heat of a battle. As a jet, you also have your own weapons. Early in the game, both jet and robot mode have a general purpose machine gun and lock-on missiles. There are actually so many weapons in this game, I don't think I can list them all, but typically the jet mode has access to way more powerful items and ultimately has a bit more variability in choosing ground targets and air targets. The robot mode has some weapons in taking out air vehicles, but nothing beats dogfighting as the sci-fi fighter jet. Anyway, there's something else I should probably mention. The crosshair. In Gunmetal, your crosshair isn't centered to your screen, meaning that you can freely aim on your screen without having to fully rotate or turn. I mean, your mech will automatically try and rotate towards where you're looking on the screen, but otherwise your cursor is completely free and unlocked. This is such a weird thing to have your mouse be uncentered. It's also interesting to note that this is a change made for the PC version. The Xbox version just has an ordinary centered crosshair. Yeah, why don't we get that? Well, it's definitely clunky when you play it in robot mode. Not bad, just not ideal. But how does it control when you're in jet mode? Okay, yeah, that's the reason why. Flying with this in plane mode is so much easier. I will fully admit, while moving around in a first or third person shooter is way better on mouse and keyboard, I think vehicles control much better on a gamepad, either in driving games or flight games, doesn't matter to me. Which is ironic because that's what Gunmetal was originally designed for. It was an Xbox game. Except I'm guessing that on PC, having to fly a jet was probably seen as a little too annoying, especially with a mouse being used to turn and rotate. I mean, it's not quite the same as just having an analog stick. So they changed to a free-looking aim reticle, and yeah, that was definitely the right choice for this. Flying in this game is so easy, especially aiming. The fact that your gun isn't locked to the direction that your jet is pointed towards makes it so much better to shoot at bad guys. So the controls. They're a little odd, but they work. This first mission is pretty simple, just teaching you the ropes to combat. Man, it's a shame we don't get any characters other than this announcer guy. I would love to see the reactions from other soldiers at the sight of this never before seen mech just completely wrecking shit. The second mission introduces you to your worst enemy, dropships. They are big, fat, and slow. However, they're also extremely dangerous with hyper-accurate turrets, and they take lots of bullets to destroy. And once they land, they'll keep deploying enemies until you actually get rid of them. This map also teaches you that oftentimes you are going to be racing back and forth between allied bases just to defend them from enemy attacks. Also, I kept completely underestimating the blast range of these self-destructing enemies. All the more reason to stay in flight mode, I guess. Overall, it's not that bad. Mission 3 is an escort mission. Oh. Well, at least it's easy. Actually, this mission is where I started flying away from the convoy just to engage enemies before they got too close. You have a radar that lets you see any enemy on the map, so you can easily find them as they spawn in. Anyway, we're getting these transport vehicles to a base to, I think, load up our attack helicopter fleet, which will then fly over to this other enemy fleet and destroy them. An enemy fleet that the announcer says is too big for us to handle by ourselves. I kind of doubt it. Doesn't look too big to me. But yeah, I was destroying enemies so fast that I spent most of the level just waiting for the convoy to get there. This is definitely when I started to worry about this game and its level design. Not just because of the slow escort mission, but because of the fact that this was a recycled map from the first level. Oh yeah, Gunmetal reuses a lot of areas throughout the single player, and this is only the third mission. In its defense, plenty of new maps are introduced later on, and even some maps used later in the game feel much more appropriate, which I'll get into. But reusing a level for an escort mission? Ugh, honestly, they should have just cut the level entirely. I wouldn't have missed it. Well, I guess as we're waiting for the convoy to reach its destination, we may as well talk about visuals. If I'm being fully honest, I kinda really like how this game looks. It's definitely dated, and some of these levels and maps are pretty barren, but despite that, I think it looks really nice. Colors are great, lighting is bright, everything pops. Okay, the sun glare can get a little obnoxious. I recommend turning that off. Much better. A neat touch is that clouds cast shadows, so not only does this give more dynamic lighting to an otherwise flat-looking field or plain or desert floor, but it also adds a bit of scale to the world. Makes you feel like a super fast fighter jet flying at Mach 2 as cloud shadows pass you by. I think it's a great touch. Honestly, this game kind of reminds me of Supreme Commander, which is funny because this game came out years before that game, but it's got the same aesthetic. These giant open natural spaces with these sci-fi looking bases and buildings, kind of just pleasant looking environments. Honestly, these levels probably look dated to a lot of you right now, but to me, they look pretty fantastic. It's clear that the object detail is very limited with low polygon counts, low res textures, and very basic geometry, but you gotta consider just how many enemies the game will throw on screen at any given moment, or how cluttered an area will be with buildings and props and even tree sprites. Oh yeah, these tiny forests were great for 2002. Also, watch me burn them down with Hellfire missiles. Doesn't get old. There were definitely better looking games in 2002, even in the subgenre of third-person mech games, but considering how open this game is with its levels and environments, I think what was pulled off was pretty impressive. Anyway, I talk more about the environments themselves, but I need to bring up some strange oddities with this game's graphics. A weird quirk with Gunmetal is the aspect ratio. Oh yeah, 2002 console game with a 2003 PC port. You know that the graphics are going to be messed with. So to me, it wasn't a surprise that this game is locked to 4:3. Of course, the game gives you an option for a cinema aspect ratio, which best I can tell is 16:10. However, all this does is stretch the image. Same thing happens if you try and force it to 16:9. Oh sure, you can force it to widescreen, but all it will do is just stretch out the image like so. Any footage you see of this game on YouTube on PC that claims to be at 1080p is simply lying to you. It's just stretching the image out like this, which I hate. I know some people like seeing their game in wide boy mode, but not me. I like my mech skinny. So yeah, 2002 game, a console game no less. I wasn't expecting native widescreen support. Or, wait a minute. Hey, there's working widescreen right there. I can see it. I mean, it's not 1080, but it's still 16:9. It's literally the proper aspect ratio and everything. This is another interesting quirk with the console version versus the PC version. The base Xbox version can run the game at a proper widescreen aspect ratio, but on the PC it's locked to 4:3. What? I don't think I've ever heard of a game doing that before. Yeah, the Xbox version of a 2002 game having widescreen support, but not the eventual PC port. I guess you could imagine that maybe back then, widescreen TVs were a thing, but most computer monitors were still 4:3. Even still, you'd think that a PC game would be way more configurable than an Xbox port. But nope, not for Gunmetal. If you're playing on an Xbox, or better yet, an Xbox 360 with Xbox backwards compatibility, you can get 720p widescreen with 60 FPS. Oh yeah, I think I wouldn't mention that. The console version supports 60 frames per second, and judging by the gameplay that I've seen of it, it's pretty consistent too. But you couldn't tell on PC because it's locked to 30 here. I've scoured the internet and I just don't think it's possible to run this game faster than 30 because apparently the program itself is actually uncapped. Like, look at the menu screen. You can see how smooth it is here, but in-game the game speed is directly slowed down to 30, no matter how much you uncap it. So there's literally nothing you can do to uncap it aside from going in and messing with how the engine runs the game itself. This is honestly the first game I've ever seen where the console version of it has better graphics options than the PC version. Huh. Man, I should have broken out my old Xbox, maybe giving you guys some better footage to look at. But nope, 4:3 and 30 FPS it is. The authentic 2003 experience. Aside from that, I guess it runs pretty well as a 30 FPS game can run. I had it crash on me once, but after setting it to compatibility mode for Windows XP, I had no problems whatsoever. Not even glitches or bugs either, like none of that. To be honest, it was a pretty smooth experience all the way through. The next couple missions aren't too noteworthy. We get a new desert environment. That's pretty nice. But yeah, it's mostly more defending our cities from incoming dropships. Actually, this desert city environment is kinda giving me Mech Warrior 3 vibes. Although that may just be the fact that I have mech games on the brain right now. I don't know. But yeah, just more of the same. Mission 5 is even a recycled map from earlier. Definitely getting the vibes that the devs are trying to stretch out their game more than they probably should. Although all these missions so far are going by pretty quick. They all feel bite-sized, like quick levels that throw you in and take you out before it gets too boring. I don't mind that. Mission 6 is actually a pretty good change of pace. We're introduced to our first enemy battle cruiser. This is pretty great. I was complaining about defense missions earlier, but if I get to fight a giant ship too, you know what? Yeah, that kind of makes up for it. This also highlights some shockingly great enemy design too. Look at this ship. It does look a bit goofy with its comically sized turret down there, but it actually serves a pretty important purpose in knowing what to shoot at. Look at how it's segmented into different parts. On the front is a shielded section, which is actually the ship's reactor core. It has turrets along its hull that you can target and individually destroy. It has hangar bays that will generate air units unless you destroy them individually too. And it has engines on the back that you can target and take down as well. This guy is a great enemy. He's split into different sections so that you can focus on different modules just depending on what your tactic is. Maybe blow up his hangars, keep enemies from spawning, or you take out his turret so that he can't shoot at you. Or if you want to take him down for good, just do some bombing runs against his shielded hull until his core is exposed and blow him up for good. God, what a fun fight. I especially love how chunks of the ship will actually break away and fall to the ground, leaving behind debris and hull breaches. I don't like bullet sponge enemies, and gunmetal has its share, but do you know what can actually make up for that? If an enemy slowly breaks apart and shows signs of damage until it's finally destroyed. I love how you can just glance at this ship and see how much damage he's taken before he's about to blow up. Again, this is great gameplay here. Well, I guess now's as good a time as any to talk about sound design. There's actually not that much to talk about. Music is kind of generic, which is actually kind of sad because mech games in general have a pretty good track record when it comes to soundtracks, so I kind of wish gunmetal was able to say the same. Just a bit of techno with a bit of light rock mixed in. Not quite as synthy or atmospheric as Slave Zero, but also not as metal and hardcore as Mech Assault. Just a generic safe middle ground. And sadly, this is no Shogo. Some tracks have a good beat to them, I must admit, but most of them are pretty forgettable. They're definitely serviceable background noise, but not good to listen to on their own, which is kind of a shame. So I'm probably going to be using music from other games for this video. Anyways, let's talk about sound effects. Some of them are pretty decent, while others are just kind of stock sounds. Decent explosion sounds, alright gun sounds, although I find it funny how the fighter jet machine gun sounds pretty weak, yet the dual SMGs sound amazing. Honestly, you're going to be mostly hearing explosions and gunfire throughout this game, since most of it consists of large AI battles. So as far as that goes, I guess it works. Mission 7. This is an infiltration mission. By this point in the game, the levels started to get repetitive, but I distinctly remember this one being a standout level. It's a pseudo-stealth level where you have to take out these 3 radar towers, which all have their own smaller defenses. Then you have to move in and take out the base itself. This level is great. For the first time, I'm not defending something. I can actually choose where to go, what I want to attack, and I can plan my strategy in advance. For example, if you take out a radar tower, they'll try and send a messenger back to base. And if you destroy that, the base will send in a scout ship to investigate why a radar position has gone offline. Once all radars are down, you can finally attack the base without fear of it being on high alert. I actually got a little cocky here because I thought the mission was almost over, so I didn't expect reinforcements. Or a fucking enemy mothership flying over the horizon. The worst thing is I have to fight this thing one-on-one. I think the problem was I was way too aggressive, so I lost a good chunk of my health early on fighting this thing. I was so low that I actually spent the rest of the level doing quick strafing runs, trying to outfly enemies while using these canyons as cover as anti-air whizzed around me. I think this definitely would have been cool had I not been fucking sweating bullets. I just needed a few more shots, get those turrets blown up, and finally I managed to take it down. Jeez. Mission 8. Another base defense mission. I've already played those before. The only thing that makes this one special is that once again, they roll out an enemy mothership. Slightly different than the last one. I'll admit, these mothership fights are really great. I actually appreciate the variety we've gotten so far. A smaller attack cruiser, an aircraft carrier, and now this, which is actually meant to be a landing ship. Except I blew it up before it even touched down. Still, they're definitely fun to fight. Anyway, I do want to talk about the environments and levels a bit more thoroughly. I mentioned it before with the graphics, but overall I do like these environments. They're colorful, nice to look at, they just have good details to them. You have dense woodland forest, open farmland, desert canyons, winter taigas. Honestly, for the limited engine, this is pretty great stuff. Also, in hindsight, it was definitely smart of the devs to give huge open levels as opposed to tighter, more linear focused shooting galleries. You see, every level in this game is, for the most part, big and open. You can pretty much fly across the map in every single one of these missions. You can go around obstacles or objectives. You're pretty much free to go wherever you want. So I'm glad we aren't restricted to any tiny city streets like in other mech games. This is just as much of a flight game as it is a mech game. Levels themselves basically consist of defending an objective, attacking an objective, or a couple missions where you escort a convoy. That's about it. I kept comparing this game to other action mech games earlier, even Mech Assault, but this is where Gunmetal is different. In a way, it's actually somewhat closer to Mech Warrior, in that these missions are all pretty much unscripted large open maps with objectives kinda just placed around them. On one hand, this makes the single player a little weaker than most. Objectives are definitely generic, maps are repeated, and set pieces can't be scripted. However, what this does instead is it puts a huge focus on the combat and gameplay itself, which, as I mentioned earlier, is great. This design is a breath of fresh air. Not as tightly crafted as a linear single-player game, but still pretty fun and enjoyable. Mostly. Mission 9 is where I think I quit the game the first time I played it. I'm not kidding. For starters, it's a repeat of Mission 7's snow map, although there is a pretty neat continuity connection, with this being the same base that you blew up earlier. And now that all the defenses are destroyed, you're escorting some salvage ships to grab what you can in the ruins of that base. That's kinda cool. However, this level has your salvage teams meander through these canyon paths into oncoming mines, so you have to shoot them all down before your ships make it to the base. Not only that, but you can't fly too high outside of the canyons without getting sniped at from one of these anti-air turrets, who do so much fucking damage to you that you'll be dead in a matter of hits. Then, on top of that, once the salvage team makes it to the base, you have to fend off an entire fleet of dropships from destroying your convoy. Oh god. First thing is, clearing these mines is such a stupid objective. Hey, if I were a military general, and I'm not, but if I were, and I had to get a salvage team across a path full of landmines, I'd probably tell them to wait until I get my minesweepers to clear them. I probably wouldn't send them in at the same time as my minesweepers are trying to clear them, and just shrug my shoulders to my minesweeper crew and tell them that they're just gonna have to clear mines as fast as they can before my salvage team just blindly walks into one. This gives me an image in my head of a minesweeper desperately checking for mines in a rush as his dumb teammates are running up behind him, completely oblivious to the fact that they're in a minefield, like it's a game of fucking curling. These turrets are also a big problem, because if I try and cut my way across the map for a shortcut, they're gonna whittle away my health and I'll be completely defenseless during that end fight. You can destroy the turrets, but they have so much health that it's going to take you a while to blow each of them up, and it just gives your salvage team more time to approach mines that you haven't even taken care of yet. But if I leave those turrets alive during the final battle, I'm worried that they're going to take potshots at me as I dogfight these dropships. This is just a mess. This could all be avoided if my dumb ally simply waited for me to clear a path. I wish there was a button where I could tell these fuckers to stay put and wait until I come back, just so I can take care of everything ahead of time. I will say though, thank God I'm playing on PC where it's much easier to aim with my reticle. I can't imagine how hard this is on an Xbox controller where you have to be physically pointed towards where you want to shoot. I think this landmine section has killed a ton of playthroughs of this game. Well, I guess now is a good time to talk about some problems with this game. I'd say the biggest problem with the gameplay mostly stems from level design, in that a lot of the levels simply don't let you heal up or collect ammo. Of course, ammo doesn't bother me, because honestly, if you're smart enough, you can easily get by without needing an ammo refill. However, not being able to heal is a bit more of a problem, considering how you are constantly pelted by anti-air fire and projectiles that are often impossible to dodge. You see, the way healing works in this game is that you have to have a friendly allied base that has a special building designed to heal you. It's a slow heal too. You have to stand in its proximity and slowly watch your health increase point by point. I hope you don't mind standing around waiting for your health bar to go back to 100. But the problem is not every level has these. For some levels, you're completely on your own, so you have to play like a complete maniac just to ration out your health. Enemy targeting you is also definitely inconsistent. Sometimes you're able to dodge projectiles if you're fast enough, other times you can't. Now, I would complain about the fact that enemies will always target you over your allies. However, I guess that kinda does make sense. Like if you were fighting a military with soldiers, tanks, and helicopters, and then all of a sudden they pulled out a transforming flying mech, yeah, I know what I'd shoot at first. So that's fair, I'll give that to you, game. But yeah, as good as the combat is, the enemies just are really inconsistent. On to Mission 10. This level is short but actually really fun. It's just a battle between allied and enemy battle cruisers. It's great. I also started to realize in this level that even though you have some air-to-ground weapons in jet mode that are pretty much just meant for ground-based units, you can technically still use them against aircraft if you aim correctly. And wow, does that do a lot of damage. You get access to napalm by this point in the game. It's a weapon that you're never going to get rid of in your loadout. Sure, the reload rate is slow and you have limited ammo, but it is fucking brutal, especially on enemy ships. I actually love how the slow reload has me doing these long strafing runs back and forth, slowly dropping payloads onto the cruiser. The imagery of a mech fighter jet dropping infantry-based bombs into a giant floating carrier is such a metal image to me. I love it. Mission 11 and 12 are kinda weird, and definitely where the level design starts to take a turn. Not only are these maps that are never reused again, meaning that they're only used once, but they're also these narrow canyon levels that force you to fly low to avoid anti-air fire. They both have these missile bases that you have to blow up before they launch. I think they both vary in their quality. Mission 11 is definitely the better of the two. Its canyon environments is non-linear, you can pretty much approach from any direction, and it also has plenty of space in between bases for you to choose your approach first. And if I'm being honest, I like how it looks. Mission 12, however, I think is set in a volcanic area. I mean, there's lava everywhere, which I'm not exactly sure if a volcanically active area is the best place to build a missile platform, but that's just me. Also, even the map has a pretty lazy design to it. Just look at it. It looks like just a bunch of linear corridors that barely fit a natural aesthetic. Anyway, Mission 12 is pretty annoying. Lots of turrets, lots of rockets to blow up. What's even more annoying is that on multiple attempts, I would think that a section is cleared out, only to then hear the announcer tell me that a missile's in the air and it's already too late, and it's basically game over. Just an annoying level. The only thing you can really do here is fly past defenses as fast as you can, blow up the missile towers, and get out of there. It's also worth pointing out how both of these missions awkwardly throw an ally base right where you spawn, so you have somewhere to heal up. At least the devs weren't that cruel. So yeah, Mission 11 is good, Mission 12, not so much. We are getting close to the end of the game, so let's talk about the developer. Gunmetal was developed by a studio called Rage Games, actually a British company. Best I can tell, they mostly made basic shovelware, and then a few titles that I actually recognize. Incoming Forces, Mobile Forces, Hostile Waters, though I think most people would probably know them from the game Striker. Anyways, Gunmetal was one of those games right on the tail end of their lifespan, since a year later they would declare bankruptcy. That probably explains why the game was ported to PC right away. But what's interesting is that this somewhat obscure game studio that I pretty much never heard of until making this video kind of branched off into interesting bits of gaming history later on. A bunch of studios split off from Rage when they went under. Two of them were generic subsidiaries and port developers. Another studio, Swordfish Studios, would go on to make that infamous 50 Cent game, and then finally Real-Time Worlds would end up making Crackdown and APB. And as best as I can tell, none of those studios are still standing. So rest in peace, Rage. It's kind of fun to see the little web of influence that this small developer had, even after its closure. But yeah, it's clear that Rage had one business model in mind. Budget games with solid gameplay and some iffy and questionable single-player design. Speaking of, I am shocked that there's no multiplayer for this game. All you get is a level-by-level campaign, and that's it. I get it was a cheaper budget game, but would it have killed them to add in some more content? I'm just saying a multiplayer mode would have been fun. These maps are nice and big too. Great levels to have some large team deathmatch action. Or better yet, how about a skirmish game mode? The one thing I kept noticing throughout this game is how all of these maps relied on not scripting, but on dynamic AI interaction. As in buildings that generated NPC tanks, aircraft, infantry, and then those very NPCs engaging with each other naturally in these large spectacle battles. This kind of reminds me of an RTS game. However, most RTS games have at least a skirmish mode, a separate game mode where you can customize your map, your game options, and just have a fun RTS battle with an opponent. This is honestly what Gunmetal should have had. Imagine a game mode where you and a team of allied mechs have to attack another team of enemy mechs, all the while both of you are backed up by AI squad mates and allies, like you have an entire army behind you. How awesome would it be to have a mech duel with somebody in the middle of a chaotic battle full of NPC tanks and helicopters and motherships all shooting at each other? Maybe you have to capture territory, which will automatically start constructing some buildings of your own, which will then reinforce your army and send more units to the front lines. There are so many ways you can approach this. It's a shame that Rage never even tried. Seeing the scope of these AI battles, even in single player, is pretty mind-blowing stuff. This is something ripe for player customization. Imagine being able to make your own missions on these pre-existing maps. Like if players could set up levels with bases, teams, and armies, and just let them juke it out in an awesome PvP and PvE sandbox. Or you could just have an instant action game mode. If the game simply gave me an option to hop into any of these maps and set up a skirmish match by myself, I'd be pretty happy. But man, for an Xbox game, especially one on the cusp of Xbox Live, having no multiplayer was a huge lost opportunity. Anyway, just some wishful thinking on my part. Back to the game. Mission 13. Oh my god, Mission 13. So the premise behind this level is kinda cool. Basically, the enemy have constructed their own brand new jump gate to Earth, just to bring the rest of their fleet over, which of course is bad news for us. So I'm sent in to take it down, by myself. Yeah, you'd think if this battle was as important as they're making it out to be, they could at least send me some reinforcements. Like, this is something that if I fail, the war will be completely lost for us. Maybe give me some air support. Hell, just send in one of our own motherships to provide cover fire. But nope, just me and me alone. Well, I like the environment. A dreary, overcast swamp. That's probably where I would choose to build the Stargate. And honestly, at least this isn't a defense or escort mission. So starting out, it doesn't seem too bad. But this is easily the hardest mission in the whole fucking game. This is another mission where you can't regain any health. On top of that, it's chock full of enemies who do a lot of damage to you if you're not careful. Anti-air tanks with Gauss cannons, turrets, and what ended up being the most dangerous enemy of all, the shield itself. You see, to blow up the portal, you gotta first blow up these 2 bases, which are sending power to these 4 shield generators, which then need to be destroyed to get rid of the shield itself. After that, you have to take out 8 or so of its reactor cores, and then the portal's destroyed. This is a nightmare. I didn't quite realize it while playing, but if you fly too close to the shields, you'll immediately lose a ton of health. Yeah, look right here. I'm not even touching the shield. I'm barely close to the shield. And boom, instantly lose 30 health. Jesus Christ. This level took way more attempts than I'd like to admit, and it is definitely the hardest mission in the game by far. I think most of it had to do with the fact that I was actually panicking, because the announcer guy kept telling me that I was out of time and the enemy fleet was already here. I didn't even know if there was a real timer or not. I mean, it wouldn't be the first level in this game where there was a hidden timer, so I didn't want to risk it. But this level was a nightmare. It took many tries, and then on my final attempt, I was super low on health, and the game pulled its BS again, where it spawned a brand new fleet of enemies to chase me down as the portal was about to be blown up, which I just barely handled. When I was blowing up these reactor cores, I was so nervous. Just one more, just one more.
Warning! It's unstable. Get out of there as fast as you can!
Oh shit, it's gonna blow up? Yeah, I didn't even want to risk how close I could be to the explosion without taking damage. I ran my ass to the other side of the level. Kaboom. And that's Mission 13. Dear God, what a climactic ending. Oh wait, we aren't actually done. There's one more mission left. Apparently the remainder of the enemy is mounting a final charge towards our base, and we need to hold out in a final last stand. It's not too bad. Basically, you have to fight multiple waves of different enemy motherships as they slowly deploy more and more units. And there's lots of these ships too, like 6 of them. However, by this point in the game, you have so many weapons to choose from that it's pretty much a piece of cake. Way easier than those cruisers you had to fight early on. Plus, you have so many allied units helping you that it's really easy. It starts off by sending you a few battle cruisers, and also some more transport ships, which have buildings on these lower struts so that when they land, they'll immediately start generating land units, which will start moving towards the base. With the first ship, I mainly focused on doing what I did before, shooting at turrets, the engines, and trying to blow it up before it landed. Then I noticed these modules down here that generate enemy tanks and land vehicles. Can I target those instead? So even if it does land, they'll be destroyed and no enemies will be generated? I sure can. God, I freaking love this. The game actually rewards you for paying attention and thinking about how to halt an enemy advance. Again, what great enemy design. Also, imagine this kind of battle in a giant PvP game. I'm just saying. But yeah, this mission was pretty easy. I actually think this was an intentional choice on the developer, because tonally it doesn't quite make sense for this to come right after the big climactic set piece that we had earlier. However, this ends the game on a really high note since the mission is way more fun than Mission 13. So yeah, I kinda gotta give it to the devs here. This was a smart final mission. So I'm finally able to take these ships down, mainly due to the fact that I have a ton of napalm. This ship-to-ship battle was pretty fucking awesome, I'll admit. And we wiped the floor with them. Boom. Hell yes.
You have saved us all.
There really isn't an ending, just a brief cinematic and credits. Also, I love how quick these names go by, really hitting home how small the dev team was for this. So that's Gunmetal. Overall, I'd say it's a pretty neat mech game with quite a few problems, some poorly implemented levels, but absolutely great action. Honestly, I'm shocked that with all of its problems, my takeaway from this game is that the combat was awesome. Because despite its weird quirks, the gameplay actually does hold up. It's not perfect, of course. There are still issues that prevent it from being a genuine classic, mainly stemming from how the campaign is structured. But damn, I'd be lying if I said I didn't have a lot of fun with it. this is a cult classic through and through, because despite its limited level design and its very basic single player, the combat, the mech transforming gameplay, and the fucking battle systems were so damn fun that it managed to worm its way into my brain for all these years. And if I'm being perfectly honest, I kinda love this game. There aren't many games where I'm able to shoot at tanks as a mech with dual SMGs, transform into a fighter jet, take off, and have an aerial dogfight against a giant enemy mothership. That is badass. So would I recommend this game? For that, I'd have to ask you 3 questions. First, do you like mechs that also transform? Honestly, if you answer no to this, I don't know why you've managed to sit through the video this long. Secondly, do you not mind levels with bare bones structure and objectives? And lastly, do you have $3? Like, seriously, do you have $3 right now that you're willing to just throw away? If you answered yes to all 3, then I think Gunmetal at least warrants a checking out. Honestly, the fact that you can still buy this game on Steam no less, kinda gives you no reason not to try it. At most, I think it'll give you a couple hours, maybe a few hours of content, but for that price, you may as well give it a look. Otherwise, Xbox copies might be a little more expensive if you want to play that way instead. Well, that's the video. That was Gunmetal. I'm glad I revisited this game. It was just a good trip down memory lane for those early 2000s Xbox games that really defined the console for me and many other Xbox gamers. But stay tuned next episode for the actual retrospective that I was meant to have finished by this point. I hope you don't mind giant open world racing games, because that's what we're going to cover. Otherwise, I'm Andy, and I hope you guys have a good one. See you next time.